Hey guys, my name is Stimson and I am an FSI here in Edmonton. Today I have the privilege of taking you guys through a squat workshop. So today we're going to go through what a squat is. It's going to be a little bit more focused for beginner lifters, but I think that'll be something that every lifter, no matter your experience, can take away from it.
For today's session, we're going to go through what a squat is as a movement pattern, as an exercise, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into what that means for forms of exercises or variations. So we'll talk about the barbell back squat, front squat, overhead squat, as well as other supplementary exercises like the goblet squat, box squat, and single leg squat. So lots of squatting today. To get things started, let's try a little activity. So if you're sitting at a desk right now listening to this, or maybe you're sipping your coffee and sitting at a table, or maybe you're standing, and if you are, that's awesome. If you have a chair nearby, I want you to find that. So I want you from your seated position to stand up, and from here, I want you to sit back down onto your chair. Now I want you to stand back up, sit down, stand up, sit down. Awesome. You just did 3 squats. Now you know what it is, and presentation done. Just kidding. We'll dive a lot more into it. The squat is one of 7 basic movement patterns that the human body performs, with basically all other exercises just becoming mere variations of them. So the squat is obviously one of them. There's also pull, push, lunge, hinge, rotation, and gait or walking. So today's focus is going to be on the squat. We're going to talk about it as a movement pattern, as a functional movement pattern, and then also as an exercise and different variations that you can use as an exercise. Some examples of the functionality of a squat in your daily life include sitting at your office desk. Maybe you are fortunate enough to be at a beach and you are sitting on your lawn chair. Going to the bathroom also requires a squat when descending onto the toilet. Perhaps you have a young child that you are crouching down to talk eye level with. And if you are a youngster, you probably really enjoy the squat position and have no issues with the mobility or mechanics of it. You may need to turn up the volume for this next part, where I take you into the gym and show you how to properly set up for the bodyweight squat.
Alright, so the setup for a squat. You're going to start by placing your feet just outside of shoulders. So again, find a comfortable position for you. It might be a little bit wider, it might be a little bit narrower. Should be about in that shoulder width range. Here, your knees and your hips are going to flex at the same time. So knees and hips sent back and lowered down. And then return to stand. Feet shoulder width apart, toes pointed out. Brace forward, send my hips back, shoulders and hips and knees all lowering at the same time. Okay, so a few points that I want to be able to see from the anterior view or from the front view is that my knees are tracking in line with my toes. If I had my shoes off, you might be able to specifically see that they're in line with my second toe, so right beside my big toe. But basically what you can see from this image is that my knees are not collapsed in. They're also not too far out and tracking really wide closer to my small toe. So that's number 1, what I'm looking for, knees tracking over my toes. Secondly, a little bit harder to see from this front angle, but I want to be able to keep my feet in full contact with the ground. So my heels aren't rising, my toes aren't rising. All 3 points of that tripod that we'll talk about in a second are in contact with the ground. From this side angle, what I'm looking to see is that my foot is in full contact with the ground. So I don't want my heel rising, I don't want my toes rising. I'm also looking at my tib-torso alignment. So my tibia essentially is my shin. So looking at my shin angle and looking at my torso angle, they should be about the same degree of flexion. So if they're not, there might be some other issues going on. So if my ankles are my limiting factor, what could happen is when I squat down to this full depth, my heels actually raise. So I don't have the capacity to actually hit a full depth squat while maintaining proper form. That's one indicator that you might have some ankle mobility issues. Another issue that I might see is that my upper back could be rounded. So if this is the case and I'm really forcing a depth that my body isn't really capable of at this moment in time, you'll see my upper back rounded. So that's not what I want to see. Ideally, I like this position where my tib and my torso are parallel to each other. My foot is in full contact with the ground, a nice and neutral head looking forwards. So this is a nice ideal side angle. From the posterior view, a couple things that are going to be noticeable here that I wouldn't be able to see from the front or side, or at least not as obvious, are a couple things that are being a little bit picky for maybe a beginner session here, but as you get more into squatting, this will be something that you'll want to pay attention to. So what I want to see is that my hips are actually square, as well as my shoulders. So believe it or not, you do have a side that you generally favor, or you have compensation patterns from whatever, it could be from past sport experience, your workplace, common movement patterns, a number of reasons. But ideally what I'm looking for is that my hips are square, so I don't have a hip shift. So that means when I'm lowering down into that full squat, is one side leaning a little bit farther than the other, or at the bottom position, is one side actually shifted over more than the other. So from here, it looks fairly square. My back is again staying neutral. And what I can also see from this angle is my arches of my feet. So if I had collapsed arches or I wasn't creating tension with the floor and my feet, you might, see my arches collapse. And again, maybe if I didn't go to a full depth, is that going to change my ankles as far as not collapsing? So playing around with the depth and looking at what your ankles are doing is going to be really important just for longevity in your squat, and focusing on maybe areas that you should be spending time with mobility or other strengthening exercises. All right, so we are going to talk about the foundation to your squat, which starts at your feet. So we'll talk about the tripod foot. As you can see in this image, we have 3 points marked out. So that is the tripod. We have a point at the ball of the big toe, the base of the little toe, and the third is the center of the heel. So all 3 spots should be in contact with the ground and have equal distribution of the weight placed throughout your entire lift. So let's do a little test. If you're able to stand up where you're at, I want you to just stand up like you would and set up for a squat. Now, I want you to be a little bit more intentional in thinking about where you're feeling the weight in your foot as you squat down. Are you feeling a little bit more on the outside, inside, front, heel? See where you're feeling it. And now I want you to try doing another squat, but with all 3 points in contact with the ground and trying to create that equal distribution. So what you might notice is that you're creating a bit of a natural arch in your foot. So if you have collapsed arches, you might have noticed a little bit more weight in that one, or like kind of the big toe side of your foot. If that's the case, we want to create a bit more of an arch. So kind of spreading that weight into position or point number 2 and 3 and 1 as well, a little bit more equally. So see how that feels. You might also notice now that you are able to create a little bit more torque in your hips. So as you're squatting down and you stand back up and you have that tension in your foot, your knee should be tracking over your second toe. So that toe right beside your big toe is where your knee should be lined up with.
Another thing that I'm thinking about is creating torque in my hips. So we talked about the tripod foot. So creating that tension, all 3 points are in contact with the ground. From here, if I think about spreading the floor or tearing a piece of paper between my feet without actually physically moving them, you'll feel your hip flexor or your hip glute turn on. So from here, creating that tension, my knees are guided, tracking over my second toe. And as I stand, creating that tension, returning to a stand. squeezing my butt at the top, making sure everything's engaged.
Arguably one of the most important features to any exercise that you're doing is that you are properly activating your core. So we're going to talk about the concept of bracing. So as you see in this image, I have a boxer. So one of my favorite tips in trying to teach how people should properly brace is to think about, if I was just to punch you in the gut, what your natural response is. So you probably tightened up your core, and it wasn't a shallow inhale. It was probably a pretty aggressive inhale, and creating like a tension all around your core. So almost if you think about your core as a canister, so you're trying to keep it fairly rigid. What you also think about is potentially having a belt around your waist. So maybe a little bit higher up. So from here, if you try to like inflate that inner tube, inflate that belt, what you're doing is creating a braced position. So this is absolutely critical as soon as you are loading your spine. So say in a back squat, front squat, or overhead squat specifically for this workshop. If you are not braced properly, chances are you're going to probably falter in some sort of movement. Either you're going to hinge forwards too much, or you're going to collapse under the weight of the bar. And you might get away with this when it's lighter loads, but as soon as you're going heavier, bracing properly is going to make a huge game changer to what you're able to lift. So again, one of my favorite cues to use is to think about, if someone was to punch you in the gut, having that braced position. Another way of thinking about it would be if you took your belly button and sternum and did a mini crunch or a mini sit-up. That's kind of another way of thinking about a braced position. Now for the fun stuff, barbell training. Here we're going to talk about the back squat, front squat, and the overhead squat.
Okay, so to set up for a back squat or a front squat, you're going to set up the same way. This particular system uses a J hook, so it is adjustable. You can set it to whatever height works for you. Depending on what squat rack you have available to you, it might already have some preset increments. Then you'll just have to find one that best suits you. The height is going to be the same either way. So what you want to find is a height that's just below your shoulders. So for this one, I'm just going to show you the J hook. So you unclip it out easily like that. Again, line them back up. So the J hook should be set below my shoulders, so that when I'm unracking the bar, I don't have to go onto my tiptoes to unrack it, and I also don't have to squat down to unrack it fully. Should have a slight bend in my knees so I can create a nice brace and stable position, but I don't want to be fully squatting before I'm already squatting. So this height should work for me. I was gonna set up. Good. So this is a high bar back squat. So the bar is set just above his traps there. Shoulders are squeezed together still. So that's what the high bar setup is. A low bar setup would be just a couple inches below, a little bit into more of the middle of his shoulders. So Miles is going to re-rack it and set up for a low bar back squat. So with the low bar, exactly, just like that, squeezing his shoulder blades together, bar comes across the center of his shoulders, and then the exact same mechanics for a back squat would take place.
What's the difference between a high and low bar back squat? As you can tell in this image here where I have the bar placed for a low bar and Miles has it set up for a high bar, there's only about a maybe 2-3 inch gap. So this actually, while sounding very minuscule, does affect your squat quite a bit. So I've made this comparative image of the low bar back squat and the high bar back squat. And what you'll notice here is Miles's torso angle in the two squats. So what's going on is in the low bar back squat, in order for Miles to maintain that bar path staying over midfoot, which provides him the most stability, he's going to have a deeper torso angle. So he's going to be, almost looks like he's hinged forwards more. Where in the high bar back squat, Miles's chest is more upright, his torso is a little bit taller, and in doing so, he's able to maintain the bar over midfoot.
without going into too much of the physics, what we can tell between the low and the high bar back squat is that lever angle of his torso. So this is where in the low bar back squat, Miles is going to be able to produce a little bit more power and torque in his hips, which if you've heard people talk about being able to lift more in a low bar back squat than a high bar back squat, this would be the rationale as to why. A low bar back squat is often used by power lifters, but there's also phenomenal power lifters who can lift incredible weight in a high bar back squat. So it's going to come down to a number of factors as far as the athlete's comfort with the movement, your mobility, your even maybe which one you first learned. So if you are just starting into squatting and the high bar back squat is the one that you learn first, that might become something that you are more comfortable with, and that's totally fine. So high bar back squats as well translate a little bit more into Olympic lifting, just with that taller upright torso. So if that's something that you're interested in pursuing, then high bar back squats might be where you want to train. If you're looking more at a powerlifting sport, then low bar back squats might be a little bit more sport specific. But I'm not going to tell you which one is better for you. But I would recommend trying out both and just seeing the difference yourself. Something to keep in mind as you begin in this endeavor of squatting is to try to make sure that you are coordinating your hips and shoulders rising at the same time. So this is important for a number of reasons, but just to demonstrate in a quick demo here, Miles has performed what we will often term a good morning squat or a stripper squat. So as you can tell here, Miles's hips rise before his shoulders rise, whereas a proper squat form, both the hips and the shoulders rise simultaneously. So try to avoid doing a good morning squat like this. You're not going to have a lot of power, and that barbell path is not staying in a nice vertical position like we would ideally like to see.
To perform a front squat, begin by setting up the bar to about shoulder height. As the name suggests, the bar will be in the front of the body, so we call this the front rack position. To execute this position, place your hands just wider than shoulder width. Place 2 fingers under the bar and drive your elbows up. You may feel some limitations at this point. Your limitation may be from tight lats, triceps, poor wrist mobility, could be a wide variety of things, so talk to your local PSP staff to help figure out what issue you may be facing. The ideal position will have the bar resting on your shoulders with elbows maintaining an upright position. Lacking the necessary mobility here will be evident if you are unable to keep the bar in contact with the shoulders. Once you have this set up, you'll perform a squat with the same mechanical pattern as a bodyweight or back squat. The difference you will notice is that you will need to maintain a more upright torso position. If we were to draw a line from the bar to midfoot, you would see why this upright position is necessary. The overhead squat is likely something that you have not tried before. If it is, you've probably felt how awkward and uncomfortable it could be. So we're going to go through how you would do an overhead squat and why you would do it. So let's actually start with the why. The movement is a phenomenal movement for a number of reasons, but does it necessarily translate well into daily movement patterns? Probably not. You're probably going to find another way to hold something over your head. But as far as sport goes, if you are in Olympic lifting or if you maybe do some CrossFit, anything that uses a snatch, this movement is going to really help you out with that. So setting up for a overhead squat, you are going to set up exactly like you would for a back squat, except for this time, after you've unracked the bar, you're going to move your hands to where you would typically snatch from. So if you're not sure exactly where that would be, typically it's going to be about, for me, it's like at the rung on the knurling of the bar. So I'm going to extend my arms out. It should be so that when I lock out my arms overhead, I can hit full extension with my arms locked out comfortably. So from here, I'm going to place my hands evenly, and then I'm going to dip to press the bar overhead. So again, I would recommend trying this with a lightweight or maybe a dowel to start with, just to get used to what this feels like. It might be a little bit wobbly. From here, press up and into the bar. So your elbow pits, not anatomically correct, but you should get the idea, should be pressing up towards the ceiling. So this will require a lot of shoulder stability, and it will give you a lot more balance in the movement. So as you're pressing up, continue pressing up for the entire movement. And now you're going to basically use the exact same movement pattern you do for all of your squats. So you're going to send your hips back and down. Again, you're trying to maintain that bar path so that it is in midfoot, in line with midfoot. So as you can see, it might feel a little bit wobbly, and that's completely normal. You might also feel like you can't hit the same depth that you can for a front squat or a back squat. And again, this will come with time, and potentially you're going to need to work a little bit more on specific mobility issues that you might have. So it could be ankle, hip, could be thoracic, so your upper spine as well. So that is a setup for a overhead squat. Again, it is a movement that's probably not super familiar to you, but it's a super fun movement to do, and especially again if you're using it in trying to improve your snatches, power snatch or squat snatch, this is a phenomenal exercise to include. You may have noticed that when we demonstrated the squat setup, we faced into the J-hook. So we were walking the bar. When we were unracking, we were stepping back, and when we were re-racking, we were stepping in towards the bar. And so we're doing this for safety reasons. As you can tell in this video here, Miles is demonstrating what it looks like when you rack it the other way. And so basically what you can tell is he racks it and is able to step forward, no problem. But when he is trying to re-rack the bar, so think about being fatigued after doing your set, he's now trying to figure out exactly where he is. He's looking back and forth, making sure he's going to be making contact with the squat rack. And then once it's in the J-hooks, then he feels secure and can unrack. So it's just not a very stable position. Again, we want to make sure that your safety is always a priority. So we highly encourage that you face the J-hooks like we demonstrated earlier in our squat setup. The goblet squat is a great entry into resistance training for the squat. So before tackling the barbell and after mastering the basics with a bodyweight squat, the goblet squat is a great next step. So holding either a dumbbell or a kettlebell at chest height and then performing the exact same mechanics as you did for a bodyweight squat, sending your hips back and down, lowering to that full depth squat, and then standing back up. Is going to be a great exercise to add into your routine.
So we're going to talk about the box squat. So the box squat is a movement that you can use for a couple different reasons. One might be if 90 degrees, so parallel, is kind of where your squat ends, or if that's a sticking point that you want to train. It's a great proprioceptive tool just to know where that distance is at. So if you're learning squats, it's a great option. It's also a great option for any experienced lifters, just for recruiting more of the posterior chain and training more of the hips, glutes, and adductors. So you're still going to set up like you would for a back squat. So Miles is going to duck underneath the bar. He's going to set up in the high bar position, so just above the traps there. Excellent. And then he's going to bring his feet just outside of the bench, so maybe a little bit wider than he would typically squat from. From here, same mechanics. So he's going to send his hips back and down, his shoulders and his hips descending at the same rate. Once he's here, he's staying nice and engaged. His core is still tight. He's not collapsing. His feet are in contact with the ground, all 3 points. His toes aren't rising. His heels aren't rising. From here, he's going to initiate the movement by hinging forward and then rising up, just like so. So same thing. He's going to send his hips back and down to descend in that squat. To initiate it, hinging forwards, recruiting the adductors, glutes, hamstrings, and then driving back up. So that is a box squat.
The single leg squat is another great exercise to add to your repertoire. As you can see in this demonstration, you set up fairly similar as you would for a bodyweight squat. So I have set up a bench as a proprioceptive tool so that I know my end point and where I can still train kind of the sticking point. So Once you have this movement down proficiently, you can also try it without the bench and see if you can hit full depth while maintaining the tripod foot and your heel not rising. Thanks so much for joining me in this workshop today. Hopefully you were able to have a couple of takeaways, maybe learn something new. And if you're brand new to squatting, welcome to the squatting world, and you are going to love it. Enjoy and have a great day.